Every Beyond Quantum Healing session begins with a question. But once the journey begins, other questions just naturally follow. Who is guiding the experience? Have you been guided your entire life? In part 2 of our Beyond Quantum Healing series, we explore the higher self and discover how wisdom, healing, and guidance can emerge from the deepest part of our own consciousness. Join us as we continue our exploration of Beyond Quantum Healing with Holistic Soul Space BQH Facilitator Francis in Part 2, Meeting the Higher Self. We're talking about talking to the higher self, right? And we'll get more into that in a minute. But when you're preparing your questions and you think you've got it down pretty good, have you had any experience where the higher self just went, let me answer it a different way, because perhaps they know what's going to be of benefit to them? It might be a slight variation of the question that they ask. Have you ever experienced that?
Yes, the higher self is very good at giving the information that the client needs and not necessarily wants to hear. But it's the only thing that I guarantee is that a client will receive what they need on the day, and not particularly what they want. If what they want and what they need are the same thing, then that's good. But no, the higher self is very good at making sure that the information that they need is definitely given.
Right, right. So we've gone on and talked about the higher self several times here, and there might be somebody that signs on here that goes, what are they talking about? So from your perspective, Francis, how would you describe the concept of a higher self? I know we all look at them differently, but from your perspective, how do you see a higher self?
I have literally tied myself in knots with that, that question. So my understanding at the moment, we are souls having a human experience. So we are an aspect of the bigger soul, and the higher self sits somewhere in between there. So the higher self is also as another aspect of the soul. It's my understanding that the higher self is with us at all times, but that they are able to move in different dimensions, whereas we are stuck in this one. Being in a physical body, they don't have any physicality as far as I'm aware, although they do take on a form, particularly when they are showing themselves to people. And when they're showing themselves to people, sometimes it can be like a version of themselves. So it looks very similar to themselves, or it can be something completely different. But it's always a form. Interestingly, when asked, they often describe themselves as a collective and not just one single being or entity. But if you think about them being on the different dimensional levels, then that makes sense.
Exactly.
Because it's different aspects. So it's a complicated concept to try and, for the human mind to try and capture. So it's this sort of larger spiritual side of us. It's them that has all the wisdom and all the knowing and all the healing as well, that a person could ever need comes through the higher self, is my understanding.
I love it. I think everybody has kind of a little bit of a different tweak on how they look at the higher self. What I love, though, when you talked about if they choose to present an image of themselves to you, because I found this to be the case with many beings that don't have a physical body. If they give you an image, a lot of times it has meaning. There's a reason why they're presenting themselves in a certain way. So I've seen mine present themselves a few ways, the same way a few different times. And of course, they did it in session. And I was like, oh, we're going back to that again, which was very important because it came up during the session. And it was some of the questions that I had, but it was just so interesting that we were just like, oh, we're back to that again. So I love that. Here's an interesting question. How would you say the higher self communicates during a session?
So we start with an interview. It's normally fairly in-depth, where people tell me about their life and worries, any health issues, relationship issues. It really is very much like a talking therapy, the interview part. Although it is very relaxed and it's just literally I am just ears to listen. But whatever comes up during that interview is always relevant to the session. Quite often there'll be questions that will come up during the interview as well that the person hadn't thought about asking, or so those can be added on as well. The hypnosis part of the session, which is I suppose what people really see what BQH as, and the hypnosis is split into two separate parts, although there's no gap in between them, if you like. So in the first part, the higher self shows the person images, movies. It could be a past life. It could be an alternative life, somewhere that's off planet. I have had clients who have been animals. I have had one who was a rock in one life. So it literally, it could be anything. However, some people don't see past lives. They might go to a healing place, or it might be a symbolic story of some sort that they're shown. The options are infinite. There's no two sessions are the same. Even for the same person, that every session is completely unique. But in the second half of the hypnosis, I ask the higher self to step forward, and that's when I get the chance to have a conversation with the higher self. And I always ask them to make sense of whatever happened in the first part of the hypnosis. Why did they show the person this, and what do they need to understand from it? And it's during that I also get to ask your questions. And I also normally ask them to do a body scan, and conduct any healing that needs to be done during the session. So the higher self is very much involved in the whole process. My higher self is also very involved in the process, because I will be fed information, questions that need to be asked, or something that I've maybe not thought about. It's always highlighted to me. Yeah, the higher self is very involved.
I love that. Which makes sense because we're really, asking things that's under their purview. I did have to chuckle though, because when they did show themselves to me, and because it's like a movie. For me, it was really similar to a movie, and I'll talk to you about that in a minute, but it was really interesting because I got an image of them like right in front of me, like nose to nose. I just went, what are you trying to say? Hello. Hello. Good to see you. But and there's something here that I do want to talk about. So, do you ever find that they might have a distinct personality or a communication style that's different than the client?
It does happen very often. They can have a completely different personality to the client. More, it's a similar personality, but it differs. It does differ in some way, and quite often the voice changes. So it can be a completely different tone. Sometimes people can actually sound quite robotic. when they're speaking through them. So but yes, there's always a distinct change, and I know when I'm speaking to the higher self rather than speaking to the client.
That's fascinating. In fact, I'll probably load a clip just so people can see how I sound in the beginning. And then we get to the higher self. And it is different. There is a
Yeah.
difference. And I was prepared for that because I do channel, and that's very common when you're channeling, that you do get their personality, their voice comes through. But it is always surprising, even if you're expecting, you're like, oh, okay. that's how this is going to be. But I find it really cool, that you can tell that you have somebody else that's communicating. Actually, let me ask you this. Do you find the same thing, say, if a spirit guide were to come through? Do the voices also sometimes change?
Yes, yes.
Mhm.
And they can change again. So if I'm speaking to the higher self and then a guide steps forward to speak, then there can be a change in tone or in the personality as well, which is yeah, it's fascinating. It's really interesting.
Yeah. I had to chuckle because I'd like to point out a few things about what they thought about how I operated. I believe they pointed out how stubborn I was. So that's always
That's
fun.
common.
Oh my goodness. Well, here's a question, because we're here to communicate with the higher
Mhm.
self. Have you ever found that the higher self might withhold some information? And if you feel like they're doing that, why do you think that might happen?
Yes, there are occasions where the higher self will refuse to answer a question, for example, or if something else is happening, but they refuse to give any information. But I never take no for as a straight answer. So if the answer's no, then can you please explain to me why it's a no? And they always do. There's no issue with that. So the client at least understands why they haven't got the information that they'd asked for. But invariably, it can be, for example, if someone's got a decision to make just ever so shortly, and that needs to be unbiased. It needs to be completely their own decision. Then they'll withhold information. I think more than anything, it's about the free will. So every human has their own free will.
I love that because that's actually something that comes up a lot in the subject of the higher self. Because very often, once we learn about that particular aspect of our soul, we're like, well, why don't they just give us a map? Wouldn't this just be so much easier if we just knew what we were supposed, as if we ever listened to what we're supposed to do? But wouldn't it be easier if we had some sort of map? So I actually really enjoy that aspect of this because it does point out that we do have free will, like you said, while they may have things that they want us to do and are hoping that we'll choose so that we can be in alignment with the things that we had thought we would do when we came down here to this earth. It does still come back to free will. What would you say are some of the most, oh my goodness, profound teachings you've received directly from a client's higher self? I'm sure you've got stories, but if you had to think of something that just really stood out to you, what would you think were some of those?
One of the most profound teachings that came through a client's higher self was on the topic of oneness and how connected we all are, not only to each other but to the earth herself and everything that's on it. So basically, everything that we do, every thought we have, everything that we say affects everybody and everything. That's
Wow.
how connected we are. And yeah, that was quite profound. How connected the humans are to the spirit world, or to the subtle world around us comes across. That comes through every session. Just how connected we are, how loved and supported every single one of us is, that comes through loud and clear in every session. On a personal note, I had a client and I had asked the higher self to do a body scan. And I always ask the higher self to explain how they're doing it. Everybody does it differently. There's no one stock way of it happening. So I asked them to explain, especially for the recording, for the client to listen back. And when I asked them to explain what they were doing, the response was, you know. And my response to that was, I do. Okay. And I sat back, and as I watched, I could physically see the energy moving. So I knew exactly what they were doing. And I said, oh, you're right. So that was really profound for me. I mean, I'm very sensitive to energy anyway. I feel it very much. But it was quite another thing to actually see it with my physical eyes and not just in my mind's eye.
For me, going in, you have your questions that you want, and I'll share just one because I felt like my higher self said something to me that will probably stick with me the rest of my life. And I'm even going to show you the image I was seeing at the time. So what they were showing me was this beautiful tree, like a giant sequoia or redwood, and the base was gigantic. And mostly I was looking at the roots of all things, although I could see the top. And it was kind of glowing from an inner source. And then I saw this little mouse. I think you would ask me, can you go in? And so I saw this little mouse come scurrying across, and the mouse goes in, and there was a whole bunch of really cool things that we talked about that was during that session. But one of the questions that I had, and it's one thing that I do struggle with, and I think a lot of us struggle with, is that we're not good enough, right? Throughout our lives, we take on a lot of things that people have told us or experiences that we've had, and we just constantly struggle with thinking that we're just never going to get to that better place, But one of the things after they showed that imagery that they said to me that I still will probably hang on to was that I can see myself as this tree in its enormity and size, or I can see myself as the mouse, but it doesn't change who my soul is and how big my soul is. And I think that applies to everyone. I think if we all could experience how big our soul really is, we wouldn't see ourselves so much as the mouse. So it's amazing the things that I'm sure they've been holding on to and try to show us in so many different ways, and we just don't pick it up. We don't pick up what they're laying down. So that is one thing I really loved about the session, is being able to get some real clarity, like a clear message that perhaps I've been ignoring, or I have heard and I'm like, no, I don't want to hear it. And they're like, no, we're going to talk about that today. What a surprise. This is your opportunity. They're like, this is our opportunity. We're going to make sure this comes through. So I can't recommend it enough just for that alone. At least in my own session, that was huge. I guess before we leave that particular area of the higher self, what are some of the misconceptions that people have about a higher self?
I think the biggest misconception is that people think that their higher self is going to be really judgmental and berating. So, and there's some people that are actually afraid of what the higher self might say about them and the choices that they might have made. You need to remember they are able to see things from a higher perspective, so they can see the whole lot, whereas we are stuck in our tunnel vision. So they understand how difficult life is and why we made the choices that we made. They probably understand better than we understand ourselves, to be honest. I mean, they might, for example, say that you're stubborn. But that's not that there's no judgment there. It's a
Right.
statement
Right.
of, this is part of you and it's part of your personality. So, and probably it's also part of theirs. So it's not, yeah, we're not so different. Another thing, well, for me, when I first did a session, my very first session, in the first half of this hypnosis, I was seeing, I see movies play. It's like a full movie, and wherever I place my focus, more opens up. So during the first half, while that was happening, that was familiar to me because it was similar to how I see visions and things in meditation. So none of that was new. But when it came to the higher self, inviting the higher self forward, I don't know whether I was expecting some disembodied voice from the other side of the room. Something that was apart from me. And it's not, obviously, the higher self is very much part of me. So I don't know what I was expecting, but the thought was put in my head was, you have to give permission here. It's you. You need to say yes. And as soon as I said yes, I started getting the information. But the information came through differently. So where I was seeing movies to start with, when the higher self was there, I was actually hearing the information. So whenever a question was asked, I listened to what they had to say, and then I relayed that information back. Probably those two things, about the higher self being this thing that's apart from us, and that they're really judgmental of us and they're not.
I've taught people how to help communicate with their higher self, and it's funny, that is a common thing that people struggle with, is that their higher self is going to be judgmental, or there's this adversarial relationship that they start to develop, like, how could you make me do this, or how could you be presenting these experiences? So that for me was one thing that I loved hearing from my higher self, is that there's not separation. You are me, I am the soul, we are all part of the soul, and that it's more of this one, you're just an aspect, but seriously we are just one entity. And I loved that unity that they were presenting, because like I said, so many people do struggle sometimes with that relationship. I also like that you were talking about it playing like a movie, because very much that's how I see things anyway. And that's how this experience was for me. I mean, literally, it was a nonstop. I'll just sit back and eat popcorn. I mean, I know
Yeah,
I'm talking, but my consciousness is just back there going, this is fascinating. What are we doing? You know? And what I loved about it, I think I told you this before, because I do channel, I could definitely tell the difference between when I'm channeling another being and when I'm channeling, or when my higher self is coming through. And I think it would make sense to people, because usually when you're channeling another being, they'll pick images that they know you'll resonate with to kind of describe. For me, they're just trying to describe whatever is happening. So sometimes it'll happen during the channeling. Sometimes it's right after the channeling, like this little movie plays, but it definitely has a different feel. When it was my higher self speaking, it felt almost like a vivid dream. And it made so much sense to me, because it's like, of course, my higher self speaks to me all the time, probably not to my awareness, but it's like they know what imagery is going to resonate, because it's me. So I loved that, though, being able to tell a little bit of the difference between how I normally see things in other ways and how my higher self chose to present. So that's really cool. I know not everyone is visual, so other people may experience it differently, and I'm sure
yeah,
that will be fascinating for you too, as you talk to people, how this experience came through, because, not all of us are visual. Some people get things just because they know it. Sometimes they hear it, so it'll be really cool to see over you know, someday, Frances, you'll have some bestseller to tell us about all about the higher self, because I'm sure there's some really cool things that that you will learn along the way, in addition to what you've already learned.